Welcome to Resiliency Redefined. I'm your host, Robyne, and I am thrilled to share with you information about resiliency, well-being, performance, education, business, parenting, and everything in between. I'm committed to joining you each week to talk about these big ideas and bring them into action, habits, tools, strategies, tactics that allow us to finally uncover what it takes to truly be well. And I'm just so excited that you're here. On this week's episode, I have the opportunity to interview Michelle Lee. Now, Michelle is such a fascinating person who talks all things carbon, sustainability, climate. And I think a lot of other people out there sometimes don't even know where to start when it comes to how I can minimize my carbon footprint. I want to do the good, but I don't necessarily know what that looks like. So I reached out to Michelle. She was so, so ready to come on this podcast so we could have this conversation. Now, Michelle also wants to flag for us that for our friends who are listening from Canada, in Toronto, we are celebrating Toronto Climate Week, October 1st to 3rd this year. And there are so many different things that are happening in the Toronto area. If you're curious about learning about that, please check it out on her website. We'll put that in the show notes. But to each and every one of you, here we are going to have a conversation about what is it that we can do? Because we know eco-steward grief, that's a thing. People are a bit nervous about the future. And Michelle has a beautiful way of letting us know that there's a lot of hope, even in all the noise when it comes to environmental factors and things that we can do. So join me for this episode. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts on what things that you think that you could do if we want to have a positive impact on our very precious planet. So without further ado, here's my episode with Michelle. I'm so pleased to be able to introduce you to my guest today. So I'm here today with Michelle, and I have been so curious about this idea about our well-being, our resiliency, as it relates to the environment. As I'm sure lots of folks have heard, there's so many different messages out there about our futures, our well-being, as it relates to our place and space here in our beautiful planet. And this is something that causes me lots of wonderments. So why not? I was just so thrilled when Michelle said, yeah, Robyne, I'll join you for this conversation because I just want to learn as much as I can because I feel so often this is overlooked. So Michelle, welcome to Resiliency Redefined. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having me, Robyne.
Awesome. So Michelle, to introduce you to our group, can you tell us about some of the good work that you do? What are you up to these days, and how does your work get out into the world, and just the topics that you're curious about right now?
Yeah, for sure. And I might just start a little bit with a kind of a step back because I
Yes.
think it's interesting to kind of see the journey. So I'm a Toronto native, born and raised in Toronto. I grew up in North York, and in 2012, I had done, a master's degree in science, and I had worked in the medical device market research for a while, and I was really looking for a new adventure
Yep.
and decided to move to San Francisco to do a year of business school, and that completely changed my life.
Oh,
I
cool.
ended up staying in San Francisco in the Silicon Valley, working for some of the biggest tech companies in
Mhm.
the world, Salesforce,
Yeah.
DocuSign, went through an IPO, didn't even know what an IPO
Yeah.
was before I got to the Valley. And, I moved to London, but sustainability has always been a part of my life. And I
Yes.
don't really think of it in a different category. I think of it more as just, something that aligns with my values
Mhm.
and a little bit of common sense. Like if
Yeah.
8 billion people are using single use coffee cups, where do these go? If
Yes.
we have a growing middle class that is demanding more animal protein, where do
Yeah.
we have the land to
Yeah.
farm all these animals? And so early on in my journey, because it is a journey, it's not like,
Yeah.
you turn the lights on and off, it takes time. And in 2017, I went vegan, much to the dismay of my foodie friends in San Francisco and my tech colleagues. We have a lot of dinners and QBRs and
Mhm.
celebrations in the tech world. And,
Yeah.
a lot of the times they happen at steakhouses. So here you have this one person that's like now vegetarian. Great. But I think it started with these types of like smaller things. Like going vegetarian is actually a really big deal.
Yep.
But smaller things like using a reusable mug or using a
Yep.
reusable bag, those are things that I already did. But when I moved to London, that's really where things started to really click because
Okay.
I thought I was doing great. And I moved to London and at a bodega, like a corner convenience store, like
Yeah.
everyone can think about a corner convenience store
Yes.
in Toronto or Peterborough
Yep.
or wherever you live.
Yes.
You could bring in your jar and refill shampoo, like just at a convenience store, not a specialty store. And I was blown away. And the public transportation was so fantastic. It's the vegan capital of the world, like
Yes.
the most
Yeah.
delicious vegan food ever. Feel free to DM me for some recommendations.
I love that.
And I was like, wow, I thought I knew so much.
Yeah.
And I realized that I knew very little. And that inspired me to really engage more. I started volunteering
Mhm.
at a local plastic free community um, nonprofit. But also, very importantly, I got engaged in sustainability at the workplace. I was
Mhm.
a sales engineer. I was helping with the sales team. I had no business working on sustainability at the workplace, but DocuSign empowered me to start my own initiative. So for the month of January, I hosted this Veganuary.
Yeah.
And essentially, for the month of January, you can do fun things. And I formed a little committee at work. And I was new to the London
Mhm.
office, but this is a great way to meet folks. And we had
Yeah.
a little vegan library. Everyone like brought some vegan cookbooks. We did a vegan bake off. We went for vegan burgers. We did a vegan pasta making class that the company paid for.
Wow.
And that was 4 years ago, and to this day, they still do it. So, you
That's
know,
cool. Yeah.
I promise this was a little step back
Yeah.
in a bit of the introduction, but I think this journey really inspired me to do more. And having worked at companies like Salesforce and DocuSign, I had a really good role model of what
Mhm.
business for good can look like and employee
Yes.
engagement and wellness can look like.
Yeah.
And so that led me to start Clever Carbon.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. There are so many different questions that I have. Thank you so much for that amazing, like, kind of like snapshot in time in terms of understanding where this kind of idea started, but also just seeing all the different ways in which it started to like unfold where you get to go now and what the work you do now, which is just remarkable. And again, there's so many pieces about that I just feel is so the way you described it is it's like, hey, this is really approachable, right? Like this
Mhm.
isn't something that like only some people over here can do. Like this is like, hey, these are some again micro behaviors that if we give some intention behind that, we can probably do a lot of good within our ecosystem, within our resources, which I love. So, Michelle, tell me a little bit more about what is it that again, as we talked about at the beginning, there's so much doom and gloom out there. It feels sometimes that there's not a lot of hope when it comes to the idea of sustainability and how we're taking care of our planet. And, I
Mhm.
even reflect back, for example, like during COVID when everything started to shut down and the planet started to heal, right?
Yeah,
I just remember seeing those images of like all of these different things that were shifting in the environment when all of a sudden that human footprint wasn't putting so many people, putting so much pressure on our planet and our resources. So,
yeah,
I love that your approach though isn't doom and gloom. Like your approach is like, hey, like there's things that we can do. And we're not setting our future generations up for this, future that's not available for them. So could you tell me a wee bit more about what that looks like? And again, I'm curious how you stay positive in
yeah.
light of the fact that there's a lot of negativity and noise as it comes to environments and our well-being and our futures.
Yeah, I think, working at the nonprofit in London was a little bit like that. The
Yeah.
messaging that they put out was there was a lot of duality, like, this is good, this
Mhm.
is bad, this is right, this is wrong. But I just don't think that type of narrative works.
Mm-mm.
And I don't think people want to engage with that type of content.
Yes.
So, what I really set out to do in the beginning, as I was starting Clever Carbon, and it wasn't really Clever Carbon yet, but I was
Okay.
looking for ways to help people understand the impact of their decisions.
Mhm.
For example, a coffee cup is bad, flying is bad, but there's such different magnitudes of quote unquote bad.
Yes.
So if people could realize what the scale is, then we could maybe internalize and change our behaviors. Because
Mhm,
think about the nutrition label. I love
mhm,
using this example. Before we had the nutrition label, people were drinking 4 soft drinks a day,
mhm.
maybe 2 in a sitting,
Yeah.
and that was pretty normal. But as information and data came out and as the nutrition label became, something that was mandated, people could see, oh, soft drink has 40 grams of sugar and
Yes.
iced tea only has like 15 or 20.
Yeah.
Like, wait, like that's half the amount of sugar. And now we have like the vitamin waters, the kombuchas,
Mhm.
and I would even argue that industries like the Equinoxes and the Lululemons are a
Yeah.
result of people having data and information, and they're able to track and motivate
Mhm,
themselves to, do more, do what's best for them.
mhm.
And I think of sustainable in the same way. Coffee cup is bad, flying is bad. It's bad. There's no number. What if we
Right.
knew that a coffee cup was 8 grams of CO2 emissions
Right.
and flying for an hour was about 130 kilograms of CO2 emissions
Wow.
per
Yeah.
hour, right? So now we have a number. And once we have numbers, we think like, okay, 8 grams for a coffee cup, multiply that by 300 days of the year that you
Yep.
drink coffee on the go. And you're like, I don't like that. So
Yeah.
maybe I'm going to do something different. Maybe I'll sit at the cafe and
Mhm,
enjoy my coffee.
mhm.
Maybe I'll bring a reusable cup.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of different ways that people can go about it. And what I seek to do with Clever Carbon is to give people information and data so that they feel empowered to make the
Mhm.
decisions that are right for them. I never say, this is right, this is
Yes.
wrong. I think it implies that,
Mhm,
like, okay, there are certain behaviors that are better than others.
mhm.
But the assumption is that just because you go on the scale to find out your weight doesn't mean that you want to go on a diet.
Right.
And just because you take our carbon footprint quiz, that's one of our
Yeah.
offerings at Clever Carbon,
Yes.
it's free. It doesn't mean that you want to reduce your carbon footprint.
Yep.
And I think that has been really key, this mindset,
Mhm.
and just understanding like, human behavior is okay. Now I know my carbon footprint. It's not scary. They're not telling
Yeah.
me to do something. So maybe I'll come back. I forget what my carbon footprint is because it's measured in units that we normally don't measure in. So
Yes.
my footprint, for example, is 21.1 tons.
Okay.
The average in Canada is around 14 tons. Average in the US is around 17 tons. This is annual carbon
Wow.
footprint based on consumption per individual. In the UK, it's actually 7.7. And
Wow.
most European countries like, the Italy,
Yeah.
Spain, France, they're somewhere between 5 and 10, and Vietnam is 2.2. So,
Oh my
just
goodness.
this knowledge is really empowering. And as I was thinking about our episode today, Robin, I
Yeah.
was thinking that, knowledge is a form of resiliency in and
It
of
sure
itself,
is.
right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, so that's what we do. We give
Yeah.
people data and we also package it in this super just cute branding,
Yes, you do.
you know?
Yeah, yes, you do. Oh my goodness, Michelle, that is so again, one of the things I often talk about as a behaviorist is I like this idea about data-informed decisions, right? And
Mhm.
sometimes, again, I like to think of myself as like the behaviorist, and yes, I have lots of heart as well, so I not everything is just about the numbers. However, it's a starting point, right?
Yeah.
It's a starting point for us to, again, build that awareness. And what I love that you're sharing is not that you're pressuring and that there's some, kind of like hidden agenda where we're going to shame people into changing their behavior. It's like,
Mhm.
no, you're a competent person. We're going to give you the information. And with it,
Mhm.
that information, you can choose how you want to show up, like how you want to impact on your behavior. And, again, I love how it also creates dialogue where we
Mhm.
can have conversations. And, anytime where we are able to learn about our behavior, understand the impact, especially as people who are mindful about the future. And again, if we think about the future and thinking like, everything's going to hell in a handbasket and, my small little action isn't really going to make a big difference.
Yeah.
Well, the reality is that collective effort of people even making small and moderate shifts to their consumption, their use, their behaviors,
Yeah.
it's going to be radically different than if we all are just frozen and do nothing,
Yeah.
thinking that like there's no hope, right? All hope is lost. So I love that you're creating tools for that. So thank you for the great work that you do. And that's the other kind of question that I'm curious about is as people are, learning and
Mhm.
seeing, and I know you've given the examples of like the coffee cup and the flight, and I love that example about the reusable containers that you got to see in London.
Mhm.
What you see right now, again, we're both in a similar area in the
Yeah.
Toronto area. Where are some of the places where people like can have what we call like easy wins,
Yeah.
where we can start, that maybe they're things that we haven't even thought about, right? We're doing the recycling, we're doing kind of the reducing, we're doing some of the traditional things that we think about, but
Yeah.
what are some of the other places that you're like, "Oh, Robin, you know what? These are a few easy wins that I would love more people to explore or try or get curious about."
Yeah. Thank you for that question, Robin.
Yeah.
I love talking about this, and
Yeah.
especially in my hometown of Toronto. But
Yes.
um, to give you a little bit of context, so, cement and steel are some of the most energy intensive and polluting industries.
Okay.
And each of them represents somewhere around 10% of global emissions. Most
Okay.
people don't know cement production actually is very energy intensive. So there's a lot of, fossil fuels used for
Yep.
energy. Steel, I think people can kind of make that
Mhm.
connection. But yeah, they each represent about 10% of global emissions. And the food and agriculture industry represents almost 25%, right? I
Wow.
think people are really surprised when they hear this.
Yeah.
The way that we farm, the amount that we need to, and this includes things like dairy and raising animals, it
Yep.
is very energy intensive. And oftentimes, on the industry side, it's a lot of carbon emissions.
Yes.
But on the food side, not only is it carbon emissions, but it's also things like methane emissions.
Mm.
And methane is a greenhouse gas that is 25 times more potent than carbon dioxide over a 100-year period. And just to give you
Wow.
an example, um, the average apple, this is a study done in the UK, is around 35 grams of CO2, carbon dioxide emissions per apple.
Okay.
Potatoes around 40 grams. And a bowl of rice is about 3 tablespoons and is 330 grams. And that's because rice production produces methane. And what we
Okay.
do in the industry is we convert most greenhouse gases to the carbon dioxide equivalent,
Yeah.
because methane is 25 times more potent. So it's 330 grams for rice. And we don't think about those things and we don't even realize that it produces methane.
Yeah.
But that's just a little example.
Yeah.
So, in terms of the smaller everyday actions, I would look to our food.
Okay.
Another reason why food I think is really impactful is because not only because the emissions are high, but it's something we can actually control.
Yes.
When it comes to the way that we commute or energy at our home, a lot of the times we don't really have a lot of control over
Yes.
the energy mix, or if there's, a bus stop outside our house
Yeah.
and if it comes often. But we can control our food. We eat 3 times a day,
Mm.
and food has very high emissions. So it's a really great place to start. And it can look like, it can look like a few different ways. So it's like
Okay.
what we eat, right?
Yes.
So another example is the average vegetarian meal is about 600 grams of CO2 emissions. The
Okay.
average serving of chicken is around 1,300. The
Wow.
average serving of beef is around
Oh my
7,700.
gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, just being equipped with this knowledge, we can all make more informed decisions about how we
Yeah.
want to eat, how often we want to eat certain things. And I don't want anyone to feel like they have to be perfect.
Mhm.
You don't, like
Okay.
I have friends who work in the climate space who once in a while will indulge, and
Yeah.
that's completely okay. But
Yeah.
collectively, when we all make small changes, it does add up.
Mhm.
So, what we eat, I think, is important. Um,
Yes.
now, how we buy things can also be really impactful. And in Toronto, we actually have a lot of great sort of low waste options to buy things.
Mhm.
And this is more around packaging.
Mhm.
So, for example, we have Bulk Barn, right?
Yes.
Bulk Barn's so fantastic because you can essentially buy everything without. Um, plastic packaging.
Yep.
I don't know if they allow you to bring in your own bag. I haven't tried that yet, but that's what shops do. And like, there's like a shop near me called Unboxed, and essentially you can buy almost everything under the sun in your
Wow.
kitchen, like, in bulk. So,
Yeah.
whether it's, like, Aero starch, like panko crumbs, flour, rice, lentils, nuts, spices, right? Because like, we all know, like, come Thanksgiving, come Christmas, there's this one recipe we wanna do that requires, this special spice, we
Yes.
never use it, we
Yes.
buy it, and then it's, like, stale 5 years later.
Yeah.
But you can actually buy by the weight and just buy what you need so that you're not, buying packaging,
Mhm.
and you're being more sustainable that way. And this is less of a focus, I would say, on carbon emissions. Yes, plastic packaging does have a carbon footprint, but it's very low because it's
Right.
quite light.
Yep.
Unless we're talking about glass, glass is very heavy. It requires more fuels to transport. It's very energy intensive to manufacture. So, glass is a different story. But thinking about our plastic footprint, our waste footprint is also part of the equation.
Right.
So buying, there are certain grocery stores, like even Whole Foods, you can buy bulk sometimes as well. And even when you're in the produce section, can you pick the produce that has the least amount of plastic packaging? Like, it
Yeah.
drives me wild that we have to buy lemons in this, like, plastic fish net, right?
Yes.
Like,
Yes. Yeah.
or that things are, like, wrapped in plastic, like,
Yeah.
3 eggplants and with styrofoam,
Yes.
like,
Yeah.
those things drive me crazy. Um, so there's that aspect, and then if we think about the more towards the end of life of food, and what I
Yes.
mean by that is, food scraps. So
Yes.
whatever you can't finish, sometimes we go out to eat and we bring the take home,
Yes.
either take out home, and then it stays in the fridge, and then we end up not eating it and we have to throw
Yeah.
it away. Um, we're so lucky in Toronto to have curbside composting.
Yes.
You don't even understand
Yeah.
what a luxury that is.
Mhm.
And I lived in New York for about 2 years. I lived in London for about a year and a half, and I lived in San Francisco for about 8 years. When I
Yeah.
lived in San Francisco, like, composting was not really in my world.
Yes.
And then moving to London, they really didn't have composting there. And in New York, they had curbside composting, but only in like certain places in
Mhm.
Manhattan and certain places in Brooklyn. So where I live, there was no curbside composting. And so I ended up keeping my food waste, putting it in the freezer, and taking
Yes.
it to the farmer's market on the weekends, which I didn't mind at all. I loved
Yeah.
it. I love going to the farmer's market, but actually, where our food goes when it becomes waste can really make a
Mhm.
difference. So
Yeah.
I'll break it down a little bit. If our food goes to landfill, if we throw our food in the garbage, what happens is these trucks have to travel a long
Mhm.
distance to the landfill. So there's more fuel used.
Yes.
And in the landfill, the food is essentially covered with all these different things, and there's no oxygen. So as it breaks down in this condition, it produces methane instead of carbon dioxide. And as we all know
Wow.
now,
Yeah.
methane is a more potent greenhouse gas. So
Yeah.
that's not a great thing.
Yeah.
Whereas if we compost, the compost facilities are typically closer to cities, so they're not
Yes.
traveling as far. And in the composting, I guess, like, process, they introduce oxygen in, and
Mhm.
as a result, carbon dioxide is produced instead of methane, which is
Ah.
25 times better. I mean,
Yes.
it's a greenhouse gas; it's not great,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
better. And then the other piece is that the compost that comes out can go back into the land
Mhm.
and nurture the land. So it's a way
Mhm.
more circular way. So
Yes.
even, the food scraps, etc., there are just small things that we can do to be more kind to the planet. And we are so lucky
Yeah.
that we have curbside composting in Toronto.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, Michelle, thank you for like breaking that down for us. So for example, like I just assumed that like that organic matter that when it would go to the dump that it would just kind of break down, but I just so appreciate just the clarity in which you described, hey, if we actually take out that organic, if we put it in the compost, it
Mhm.
actually is going to create less of a negative. Although, yes, we're dealing with negatives, it's going to be less of a negative than
Yeah.
if we just do it by removing it in the regular trash. I didn't know that. Thank you so much
Mhm.
for enlightening me on that. And again, what I hope that our listeners are able to see is that, it's these small micro behaviors that, you're going to do something with it anyway. So why don't we do it in a way that's actually going to minimize the impact? Because you are going to be working with these, again, with these leftovers or whatever it is. And I just really appreciate showing that, hey, this is a reason why. Because I,
Mhm.
I really believe when people understand the why behind what we're doing, it's
Exactly.
easier to build that enrollment, to build that engagement and build that practice. And again, even, I know when my children were younger in elementary school, there was the challenge about, one day a week, just trying to, go, eating a vegetarian diet and one, like just start with one day a week and see what
Mhm.
that's all about. And again, that it doesn't have to be this massive overhaul. And it is something that's accessible to us if we get kind of curious and open to learning. And as you said, using data like you do in terms of the information that you share with
Mhm.
your whole work, that we can do something about this. And again, I think sometimes when we feel a lot of, even just what we talk about, like in my book, when we talked about the environmental realm of stressing wisely, that there is ecological grief, that sometimes people are just so overwhelmed that they don't do anything. And,
Mhm.
when we're able to take small actions with some of that anxiety about worrying about the future, it actually starts to help it seem that it's possible to address it. It seems like it's possible that we're able to work with what the reality of our world is. So I really appreciate you showing that example. So thank you for that.
Yeah, my pleasure, Robin. And I want to add just an additional layer to
Yes.
what I shared around food, right?
Yeah.
Not only are some of these things better for the planet, but they may be better for your health, right? Like, I'm not a
Yes.
doctor here, I'm not a practicing medical practitioner. I encourage everyone to do their own research.
Yes.
But a lot of the times, I think when we think about eating vegan or vegetarian, it's like, oh, you're eating a lot of pasta, a lot of starch, a lot of carbs. But that's not how I eat.
Mhm.
I eat a lot of whole foods. I eat a lot of rice bowls. I don't eat a lot of salads.
Yep.
And, I hadn't gotten my blood work done in a while. And I just went and got my results,
Mhm.
and everything was on track. Like,
Mm.
my doctor said I was in great health. And I've
Yep.
been, I guess, vegetarian for almost 10 years now. And
Wow.
even thinking about the packaging piece, right? Not having microplastics,
Yes.
ingesting that is also really beneficial for your health. So
Yep.
sometimes we can look at it through the lens of, what can I do for climate? What can I do for the planet? But also, like, what
Yeah.
can I do personally for my health? And I think that
Yes.
resonates with people as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That is such a great point. And again, there's so many, I think with in many areas, there's all these misconceptions, right? There's this misconception that, if you are eating vegan or if you are somebody who is eating vegetarian, that like all your other levels are going to be off and you're going to have to do all
Mhm.
this supplementation. And what I hear you saying is that like, wow, there's ways that we can do this and it's so much more than just salad and supplements, right? There's other ways that we can enjoy, colorful, beautiful family meals and have these opportunities for, again, just engagement, as you said, like even with more things becoming available now for people to be able to have different choices when it comes to these areas of focus, which is just amazing. And one of the practices, I'm mindful of our time, and one of the practices we talk about this as our wellness relay. So Michelle, what happens is a guest often leaves a question for the next guest, again in the spirit of what Stephen Bartlett does on Diary of a CEO. And
Mhm.
if it's okay, if you're up for it, the previous guest had no idea who was going to be the next
Oh,
guest, and
wow.
the question that they did leave a question for you. So if you're
Okay.
open, I'm happy to share that question. And if you choose to leave a question for the next guest, you're absolutely welcome to do that. Are you open to trying the question that was left for you? And it
Let's
feels
go.
there you go, and it feels very appropriate. And again, I love that they didn't know what we would be talking about or you, but the
Mm.
question feels very appropriate given what we've just been chatting about. So the question that was left is, if you could have dinner with a version of yourself from 10 years ago, what do you
Mm.
think would surprise you the most of where you are now? So if you imagine 10 years ago and now you're here,
Mm.
you're sitting there with
Yeah.
yourself 10 years ago, what do you think would surprise that part of you the most?
I think everything about my life right now is very surprising.
I
It's
love it.
just like I never expected to leave the tech world.
Mhm.
10 years ago would have been 2015.
Mhm.
I had just started working for Salesforce then. I probably saw myself, in a career path at a tech company,
Yeah.
just kind of learning and developing in that organization. I never would have thought that I would have my own business.
Mhm.
I never thought that I would be a keynote speaker.
Yeah.
And I never thought that I would be in some of the rooms and spaces I've been. It's been such a wild adventure since I started my climate work. So
Yeah.
I think I would just be like, no way, I don't
Yeah.
believe you.
I love that. Oh my gosh. And as someone who, again, thank you for sharing that answer. And I love that, so often when I'm talking to guests on the podcast
Mhm.
is this kind of idea of this like, this side quest, right? This kind of like side quest all of a sudden turned into this new thing. And
Yeah.
you're able to build a livelihood and a lifestyle around it, which is
Yeah.
just so cool. And it's a common theme I see so often, especially when I'm chatting with like really strong, like women who are like, really co-creating these big bright futures. So
Mhm.
often they're these side quests that turned into something when they bet on themselves. And I just love that theme continues, that the theme continues. So
Mhm.
again, Michelle, in the spirit of that, you're welcome to leave a question for the next guest. I always say there's no pressure. Just email it, DM, text me. You don't have to worry about coming up with a question on the spot. We would love to hear your question whenever you're ready, and we'll pass it to the next guest. But also, thank you for taking the time to, like, I think really demystify something that sometimes feels so overwhelming we don't know where to start, and giving us some of that information is given just a sense of, what, there's small things that we can do that actually can make a really big difference. So thank you for the amazing work that you do, and for making this topic something that is like, yeah, I can get on board. There's things that I can do. And I just really appreciate you and your skills and your talents and your gifts that you're sharing with all of us. So Michelle, thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much, Robin. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you for spending time with this podcast episode today. I hope you found something helpful in Resiliency Redefined. Please feel free to share it with somebody who you might think could benefit. Maybe there was something useful, something in particular that you think you could pay forward. Also, if you have a moment, please feel free to rate and review this podcast wherever you like to listen to your podcast. It means the world to me. And again, thanks for your time. Thank you for your interest. Take good care, and I'll see you next time.